Hi, I'm Adam, and Eve and I today are going to be speaking to Saskia, who is one of our colleagues at Private Therapy Clinic. So Saskia did an MSci, which is an integrated master's, and Eve and I just want to kind of ask her a bit about it to learn a little bit more about how that was for her. So hi, Saskia. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So please, is it okay if we could just start off by actually defining what an MSci is, just for people who aren't really sure about what it is, and just tell us a little bit about just the overview of the program for you.
Yeah, sure. That's absolutely fine. So I did a 4-year MSci, which is the integrated masters, as you said. So it starts off the same as the bachelor's, the 3 years. But instead of graduating with everyone else to do the bachelor's, you just go straight into a master's. So you don't have a bachelor's graduation or a grade at the end of it. You just go into the next master's year, and that master's year is worth 50% of your full grade of the MSci. So it's weighted pretty heavily. You do a dissertation at the end of the bachelor's, so like I said, it's the exact same, but then the dissertation that you do in the master's is a lot heavier. So you have a couple of modules that you can specialize a bit more. So I did clinical and health, a module in that. I did a module in social psychology, and then you do research, a really advanced research methods as well as your dissertation. So my master's dissertation was 10,000 words, whereas my bachelor's dissertation was 5,000 words and more of a research project. So a little bit different, but you can kind of come up with your own question, and in your master's year you find your own dissertation supervisor as well and come up with a proposal. So you get a little bit more freedom in the master's year, and then at the end of the master's year all your grades are calculated, and you get one full mark at the end, but it counts as an undergrad. So instead of getting like a master's distinction or merit, you get a 2-1, 2-2, or a first. Luckily I got a first. But yeah, it's a lot of work, but I definitely recommend it because you can go straight into the masters, which means it's still an undergrad, and you get a really good like loan from the government. You don't have to apply for another one after. So yeah, really good program, and I definitely recommend it for anyone that's interested in doing a master's straight away.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Saskia. I didn't know much about them until you gave me that overview, so that's really helpful. Out of interest, what kind of are the benefits of doing a course like that as opposed to just a normal bachelor's and then taking like a separate master's?
Yes, so that's something that I thought myself. I actually applied when I first applied to unis. I knew I wanted to go to the University of Bath, so I applied for the bachelor's and the master's because I knew there'd be, well, the MSci, because I knew there'd be a few less places. But the reason I applied for the MSci, and that was the one I really wanted to do, was because I knew that I would be passionate to get a master's after, and I didn't want to have to reapply. I had a look at the course overview, and I knew that that's kind of what I'd want to go, what university I'd want to go to. So that would be the main thing, is that it takes a lot of the stress out of reapplying and getting accepted, because you get accepted from the beginning. And then I think the other main one is that you don't have to apply for a different type of loan as well. It's the exact same loan as your undergraduate, which also helps with paying it back. And then I would also say probably a really important thing you have to think about is when you go and do a master's, you want to make sure that it's like, you know, the people and like, you know, the dissertation supervisor you want to have. And if you have done your bachelor's there, you kind of know what research you want to go into and who you want to do it with. So that was another important thing that I kind of thought about. Those are, I'd say, the main ones, but I think the loan is probably the most practical advantage to doing an MSci.
That's quite interesting. So when you done the MSci, when you applied knowing that it was an MSci, that it was 4 years.
Yes, so I applied, when I applied to Bath, the options were a bachelor's, the 3-year bachelor's, the 4-year bachelor's, which includes in a placement, the 4-year MSci, which doesn't include in placement, but it includes the master's year, or there was a 5-year one, which includes the placement and the master's year. And so you apply knowing that you're going to go straight into whatever you applied for. So I knew that I was going to go into a master's. Now, saying that, it was said that if you do not get a 2-1 at the end of your bachelor's, so the end of your 3 years, you may not be accepted into the MSci course, because they might have had a few more, because I know that a few of my friends decided actually I might want to do the MSci instead of just doing my 3-year course, but they weren't accepted on because there weren't enough places. But I know that you could potentially lose your place if you didn't get the 2-1 and the grades, but I don't think that happened in the end. I do know someone that did get a 2-2, but they spoke to the course runners, and they kind of came to an agreement. So I do know you have to be quite careful to be able to be accepted actually onto the master's year by the end. But yeah, I knew what I was applying for and what I was getting myself into from the start, basically.
Right, that's like different to what I experienced. So I went to UCL, and when we were doing our 3rd year, we were told at the end, if we wanted to apply to the MSci, that we could then apply, and then we'd have to go through like an interview process, stuff like that. So maybe that could be a difference that like the viewers maybe should think of. Like maybe sometimes you can apply to the MSci from the beginning, whereas sometimes it could be something that you're offered at your 3rd year. But I think maybe at the time when I was applying, it was newly introduced to UCL. So maybe I think what you're like the route that you're describing is probably more common.
Yeah, I definitely think some unis do that. I, like you said, yours was just being introduced. My year was actually the first year to get to do the MSci as well. So they obviously took a bit of a different approach. But I know that there were a lot more places in the next year because our year was quite successful. So I know that they also did a similar thing, like you said, an interview process if someone wanted to move from the 3-year bachelor's to the 4-year. So I think it depends on the uni. It also depends on everything. But I do know that I applied for the MSci, and I know that you can still apply for some MSci courses from the beginning, but I'm sure they won't hold you to it. If you decide that the MSci is not for you, you can graduate with everyone else.
So obviously you mentioned earlier that you did quite well, or very well, in both kind of aspects of your degree, so your bachelor's and your intercalated master's. And obviously you mentioned that there's a requirement to get at least a 2-1 to progress onto the MSci. I was wondering if you could kind of share with us any kind of general tips that you have for kind of doing, like making notes throughout the year and keeping up with lectures and things like that.
Thanks, Eve. Yeah, I did do really well. It took me a while to get into the swing of things. I definitely did the best in my master's year, because by that time I kind of realized what the important things were. So what I would say, just regarding lectures, you don't have, in most psychology courses, you don't tend to have a lot of contact hours, so you don't tend to have a lot of lectures. But I know that when I was in my lectures, I was finding it hard to make notes at the same time as paying attention and taking the info in. So what I did, luckily sometimes they were recorded so I could watch them back later, but just in case they weren't, I would take a dictaphone, so just a recorder, and record the lecture. And ideally I wouldn't take notes. I would just, unless there was something specifically that I wanted to like come back to straight after, I would just record it and just try and listen. And then when it came to like assignments or exams, I would go back to the recordings of those lectures that were involved, and then I would come and take notes because I'd know what would be more involved in the assignment, and that would like consolidate that information basically. So yeah, I would try and just listen at the start, but I definitely recommend not doing that if it's not recorded, because you can't always trust yourself. And sometimes in those 8 a.m. lectures, you can find yourself a bit sleepy. So I definitely recommend recording notes. But in terms of just doing well, kind of in your assignments, the main thing that I found helped was finding out how to do a good essay structure. And it sounds super basic, and actually my course, they gave us a guide to writing a good essay structure at the start of our first year. And did I look at that? No, not until like 3rd year. I didn't realize where I was going wrong, but then I realized that that's so important to be able to get your argument across, and that's the main important thing in psychology. So I figured out how to do a good essay structure and include a lot of critical analysis. They'll say that to you again and again and again. Really research how to do that, and what's good critical analysis, what's bad critical analysis. There will be examples online, and I literally had to, because sometimes you're doing so much, it just sounds like a completely different language by the end of it. If you go to like back to the basics, get explained to you really easily, then that's how I would say to first then move on with like doing a really good essay structure, doing really good critical analysis, and that will help you so much during like assignments and stuff. That was how I got the higher grades towards the end of things, was because I had a complete structure. I had a good argument that people could like follow. And then I would say within that, the main thing apart from structure content wise would be read a load of journal articles for each assignment. I know that sounds like a lot of work, but if you read one, then usually another one cited that's quite interesting, and then go on to that one, and like make sure you have quite a big basis so you can pick the information and put it into a structure. That's how I kind of got my content, rather than coming up with a structure and then looking at the content. I came up with the content and then put it into a structure. And I would say focus on the articles that talk about things that you've never heard of, because your lecturers are reading so many essays and they've heard a lot of the research before. If someone says or something cited that is completely different to something you've ever heard, or involves a different cultural view or a different epistemology, then definitely focus on that and put that in your essay, because you want something that's a bit different and will make you stand out. But just make sure you understand it as well. They would probably be my main ones for excelling in your assignments, and doing your lecture notes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like in terms of essay structure, like as you said, that's something that's drilled into you from the first day that you arrive at university. Because, well, for psychology specifically, because a big part of being a psychologist is like concise scientific writing. And also, just when you think of it from the perspective of the examiner, like they literally hate people who their essays are just so difficult to track, because they need to give you a mark and you're making it harder for them. But I know like a really good piece of advice that I was given by one of like a seminar leader that we had, was to actually, if you're struggling with structure, to just include subheadings like in your essays. So when I started including subheadings, like my grades shifted from a 2-1 to a first, and it was just that, like making it that much easier for the marker to read. But yeah, thank you for sharing those pointers. I think they're actually really useful, especially like looking back at it retrospectively. I'd be interested just to know how you prepared for exams. Like obviously there's a lot that you have to do with preparation. Like you have to understand the content and then memorize it and then know how to structure it. So it can be really stressful for students. So I'd be interested to know, as somebody who done quite well, like how did you prepare for your exam?
Yeah, so that was something, I can understand that it's so stressful for a lot of students, because a lot of the time my exams were essay based. So I had one multiple choice exam, I believe, in my first year, and then every other exam was essay based. So the kind of thing that I did to prepare would be to mainly write practice essays, and if I didn't have enough time, I would just write the structure and do a detailed structure and plan, including like your points and studies and stuff like that, and I put them on flashcards, and then I get my boyfriend or a friend to test me back and kind of go through the structure. Because once you've got it's called effortful recall. If you're like really trying hard to write something and put information together, it actually consolidates that memory much better. So like things like quick pop quizzes and stuff like that, even if you don't really know the information, actually consolidates the memory a lot more, so it's better to recall like later on in your exam. So if it was hard for me and I was really struggling to write these essay structures, I knew that I would remember them better later. So that's what I did. And I had one lovely lecturer who I absolutely loved, who would give us, I think, so you'd have to write 3 essays, and he gave us 12 essay questions, and the 3 questions would be in there somewhere. And it would be like, so I know if I write every single one, I'll have an essay for it. So I did that also. Some other lecturers obviously didn't do that and didn't give any guidance to what questions would be on, but I come up with my own ones, and then I just write essay after essay, and then you kind of feel the same points coming up and again. But yeah, sometimes the time doesn't allow for it, so you have to just do a plan. But that's what I do, just make sure you have a structure and an argument, and just revise that. And that really helped me with my memory, because at the time it was hard writing it, but I'd already done that before. And so then when I did it in the exam, it was a lot easier. I just kind of flowed out the pen sometimes.
Thanks, Saskia. I think that's really useful. I've got some exams coming up in a few weeks, so I'll definitely pinch through a few of those tips. Also, out of interest, like, how did you kind of tackle your dissertation? So obviously you did more of a research project type dissertation in your bachelor's, or research type project, kind of longer essay, and then a dissertation, so more of a like less, you're not actually doing the empirical research yourself. How did you go about tackling both of those?
So actually, sorry, I wasn't clear at the start. They were both empirical. Well, they were both research projects, because Bath is super, super, super research focused. So we did research projects throughout, but then our dissertations were research projects again. So like a journal article that you would read, but then it would be longer. But so I don't know if I would recommend this for some people, but maybe some. I was a science girl through and through, my whole like start of the years, and like I knew like a very scientific research structure. I knew how to write those. I'd done them for a lot of the years of uni, and when it came to my dissertation, I'd found out about a completely different approach to psychology that wasn't a scientific project. It was, or a scientific experiment. It was basically examining language and how reality is constructed through language. So it was completely different to anything I'd heard of before. And I decided to do that for both my bachelor's and my master's dissertations, because I learned how to do it better 3-month bachelor's. But so I wouldn't recommend for that for some people unless you're super comfortable and super passionate about it. I didn't shut up about it. I was so amazed by this new approach that I'd never heard of before, that like made me think about everything in a different way. So I read a lot about it, and I really wanted to do it. And I'd encourage you to do that if that's how you are about a certain approach or a certain subject, then that's what you should do. Because if you're not passionate, it's not going to work. So don't try something new if you're not passionate or you're not kind of comfortable with doing it. But if you can try something new and something that challenges your thoughts or challenges the way research has been done before in that area, then I would recommend trying it out. But it can be quite confusing sometimes, and it's good to have a great dissertation supervisor who's very much versed in the area. I learned from my bachelor's that I needed someone that it was more versed in that particular research area, because it was a struggle without the support. So I learned that for my master's, and I did better in my master's because I knew that I had that support there and they'd be able to help me. But yeah, so I definitely recommend trying something new if you are comfortable and you're really passionate about it. But if not, kind of stick with what you know, but also try and find something new to do. But in terms of, that's just kind of in terms of finding a question. But in terms of actually doing the dissertation, I definitely recommend starting as early as you can, coming up with your question as early as you can, starting all the readings. I know everyone would always say this, do it as early as you can, and finish it a few days in advance. If you can. For me, I wasn't able to do that, but I know with assignments, when I finished them a few days earlier and I left it for a day or two and then I came back, it was so much easier to look at things through fresh eyes. So my bachelor's, I was able to do that, but my master's, I wasn't. I was up until the very deadline day. I don't recommend it. But that was something that was so important, was to start it early, get it finished early, so I could come back and edit it with fresh eyes, because by the end you've done it for months and months and it doesn't seem like a actual language to you. It seems like something completely different. So yeah, I'd recommend starting as early as you can regardless, because you will need that time and you will fill that time, but also make sure that you have a social life as well, which is fun.
Yeah, but really good advice there, Saskia, especially about social life, because that it genuinely disappears when you're trying to do your like final deadlines. I think it would maybe be useful if, because you did mention that you kind of for your 4th year there was a health and clinical focus, but then you said you also kind of focused on language and instruction of reality. So is it okay if you could just like, because I'm not sure as to if the structure of that 4th year is similar to the BSc, or if it's more like you're kind of left alone to do your research and less teaching. So if you could just tell us a little bit about maybe the modules and the structure of that 4th year, please.
Yeah, sure. So when it came to the 4th year, we had the complete 2nd semester, apart from one module, to do the dissertation. So that was everything was focused on that. You did have the 1st semester kind of find your supervisor, your dissertation supervisor, and do stuff like that. But other than that, it was teaching modules. So you had all of your teaching modules really in the 1st semester. And that would also be to help you kind of come up with your dissertation question and stuff like that. So my modules that I chose were advanced clinical and health, that was all together, and then advanced social psychology, because I liked the both aspects. I didn't want to leave one, so like I said, I do the science and then I did the more real critical social side, and then the main big modules that we had which weren't able to be I chose those two, but you couldn't choose advanced research methods, because that was something that was really important to your dissertation, and that we'd have other master's students who were doing advanced research methods as a clear master's on their own. They would come and join in on our lectures, and that would teach you things like really advanced stats tests and really advanced social side of things as well. So I did a discourse analysis for my master's dissertation, but that was included in advanced research methods, which you probably wouldn't have done in your bachelor's year. So it would always, and things like meta-analyses, which you don't do in your bachelor's year, you would do in your master's year. So that was the main kind of breakup, was you do a lot of research methods in your final year, as well as 1 or 2 chosen modules during the 1st semester, and then during the 2nd semester it was all pretty much go do your dissertation. Like, you can we'll have regular meetings with your supervisor, but other than that, like, just go and do it. And that would be, so for me, I looked at political rhetoric about climate change, something crazy, but then other people were doing experiments, so they were getting people in to come and do like experiments and gathering their data and then just writing it up. And yeah, that was pretty much the whole 2nd semester, apart from like 1 or 2 less heavy modules.
Thank you, Saskia. I think you've given a very comprehensive overview of not only what the MSci involves, but also how to actually do well in it, which is also quite important. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your experience. I'm sure it will be very helpful to anyone who's considering any kind of psychology degree, because I know it's quite confusing when there's a lot of conflicting information out there.